Okay, let's begin. I am Lanice Antoine Shelley, and I'll be your host through constructive, healing-based conversations designed to illuminate the adoptee, parents, and the adoption curious. We center the topics around community, mentorship, leadership, and healing, so you get a multi-dimensional view that is ultimately empowering. These are the voices who could not speak when they were young. Hey y'all, if you've seen me on Instagram, I'm in my summer glow phase and I am unapologetic about it. My hair is luscious. Fun fact, I didn't start properly treating and doing my own hair until I was a grown adult because like many Black adoptees, no one showed me how to do my own hair. And because I love you all so much, I'm going to share with you my hair secret. I'm always on the lookout for things you'd love and things that will enhance your well-being inside and out. We Unique Cosmetics sent me their Moisture Lock pomade and scalp and hair therapy oil from their Metamorphosis line, and it's so decadent, light, and nourishing, fam. This has become a hair routine staple. It has a soft lemongrass scent that people comment on when I walk by or when they're doing my hair because now I have boho locks. They also sent me a 15% discount link for you to try their products and hair tutorial service. And Unique Cosmetics is Black owned and operated by a mother and daughter duo dedicated to helping the adoptee community. Check out the link in the show notes. And this is for all ages, fam. So tell your friends. So come on, embark on a hair-loving journey with We Unique World. From interactive workshops to premium products, they're all about empowering you to embrace your unique hair journey. Because remember, all hair is good hair, especially when it's healthy. Hello, friends. Oh my goodness, how are you? How is your heart? This week was jam-packed for me, and that is why I am publishing this the very same day it's due. Forgive me. We made it though, right? Things may not be perfect, but we try our best. Okay, that's what I'll keep on telling myself. All right, this week is the conclusion of our adoptee interview with their adoptive parent. Jamie-Lyn is back to discuss with me how she felt about her chat in last week's episode with her mother, Denise. I told you before how much I loved their dialogue. It was authentic, revelatory, and empathetic. These episodes hold so much value because they model what is possible for families far and wide. I'm all about diffusing the anxiety around things that may initially appear challenging or hurtful or all those icky, sticky things. I also acknowledge that even in the best conversations, there are some uncomfortable bits that need to be worked through. But that is the key. You can, in that moment, choose to work through it. You know that I love Jamie-Lyn, who I met when she volunteered to be a panelist on my panel series last year. Well, here she is again for a one-on-one conversation with me. Let's get started. Okay, Jamie-Lyn, thank you so much for joining me again. You were on the panel series about a year ago. I think this month or something like that, we started the panel series. And you had such a powerful impact and presence and created such great conversation. I just want to start with backing up to that experience before we get into last week's episode. So how was that experience for you? Because you mentioned that things had shifted for you, and what things shifted?
Yeah, absolutely. That was kind of came at the beginning of a time where like my life was totally changing, which was interesting. I don't think I realized at the time of the panel how like everything was going to be impacted in a year in the middle of a pandemic. So I got like a promotion at the job I was at, ended up getting into graduate school to get a PhD. Started graduate school, changed jobs, bought a house. So like a lot of different shifts. A little bit of shifts in family, I think too. After the panel, that was, I talked to my mom and my dad right after the panel, and that was like one of the first times I think I've talked about my experiences as an adoptee on like a large stage. Um, and even more so with multiple family members listening. Like I had a couple aunts and uncles that listened to the podcast live, and then a few that listened afterwards. And it was the first time that I had those ever had conversations with them about it, honestly. My parents and I have always had conversations. My mom mentioned when we talked, like that they were told during the process, like bring it up when they're in diapers and make it a word that's not surprising, right? So I remember being like 3-4 years old having those conversations about being adopted. It was never a secret in my house. Even though they probably could have made it a secret for a while because we look like each other. My brother and I are both adoptees, different circumstances, no genetic relation. And like we looked like twins as kids, even though we're 18 months apart. And my mom like loved it. She used to dress us as twins, like in little Oshkosh overalls with like he's in a blue shirt and I'm in a purple shirt, and we're like blonde with like 90s haircuts, like he had the little bowl cut and I had like the little bangs, and like they could have lied, they could have lied and we would have believed it for a long time probably. But they didn't make that choice. And I know some people that they do make that choice and then they find out later and it's this big, eye-opening secret. And but it was still not a conversation I think my parents had heard me say. I feel like they felt like maybe it was conversations they had to me and not one that we had together. So I think that was a shift because we started talking about it more together, or at least I'm assuming their perspective.
My sister and I were dressed up as twins too.
Really?
We're not biological, nor are we the same age.
Right.
A year and 9 months older than me, but people thought we were twins for a good year or so.
Right.
But that's just so funny. I think that happens with every family.
Yeah. It's something I think they just like to dress siblings because I have like friends that are, biological siblings and they did the same thing where they wear the same outfits and stuff. So I think it's just when you have two kids, probably similar age.
Yeah.
You dress them up as twins. It's funny. I find it funny.
Yeah, it is. It's so cute though, when you see that.
It is.
So with the panel series and with these new conversations that are coming out of that experience, how is your relationship with your family now, having outed all of how you felt about your adoption? Did anything in those relationships change, or were they informed by what your family heard on the panel?
I think it changed in the sense that like my parents felt more reassured. I think they felt for a long time that like I felt certain ways and they still do a little bit, that I had certain beliefs or like certain feelings or wanted to do things. A big conversation that my mom and I have been having is like her belief that I have wanted to find my biological family, and just don't want to hurt her feelings. And I was like, I love you and I never want to hurt your feelings, but it really has nothing to do with you. Yeah. And I'm like, maybe that hurts your feelings and I don't want it to hurt your feelings in that way, but like it doesn't, and that was something that just came out like 3 weeks ago, maybe. She was just telling me like, yeah, I was telling people about the podcast and, I was telling them like, you're just waiting for me to die to do this. And I was like, wait, what?
I know. Wow.
Yeah. I was like, absolutely not. Like, first of all, I could have done this and never told you.
Yeah.
Like I'm 30 years old. I could do that anytime and like never had that conversation with you. And I have a friend that did that. And like, my understanding is her mother still doesn't know, that she's had this entire relationship that like met her biological mother, had a relationship and like has now terminated that relationship with her. Not on the best terms. And her mother has no idea. And this has been like a 10-year process, So I'm like, I could have done that and just never told you. Or I could have done it and told you and not felt like I was hurting your feelings because my parents have always been, I can think of many conversations where my parents were like, well, we will help you, as young as like 9, 10 years old, like you let us know. We have to wait till you're 18 because of the law. But when you turn 18, we'll help you and we'll do what you want to do. So it was interesting for me to hear my mom say that. And she's like, she told me, she's like, I just still don't know if I believe it, but I appreciate what you say, but I don't know if I believe it. So, interesting. I think that was one of the big things that came out of the panel.
Wow, that is so interesting. And it's very controversial, right? This idea of bringing up finding your biological family with your adoptive family, your adoptive parents, and their reactions. And I have to tell you that when the reactions become them centered, it sparks something in me, because you're right. It has nothing to do with them. It has everything to do with you and where you are in life and what you need to feel whole, to feel that you have a clear vision of who you are.
Right. Absolutely. And I think, my mom she does know me best in this world. So it's interesting for us to be like so disconnected on that idea, and I'm like, maybe it's just different than what you would expect from me. Like her big thing is like, you're nosy. And I'm like, she's absolutely right. I am nosy. Like, you're right. I am nosy, but I also have a lot of reasons why I don't want to be nosy in this circumstance, and why like that doesn't apply for me. So yeah, it's interesting. It's very, very interesting for that to be the case. My dad, not so much. My dad's kind of just like, yeah, whatever you want to do, we do. You don't want to do it, you don't want to do it. You want to do it, you want to do it. My brother too. My brother is an adoptee also, and he's just not interested at all.
Yeah.
And my parents know a lot better his information than mine. And he's just like, nah, no, I have no interest. Like, I'm good. And they don't really question his reasons behind it as much, I think. And my mom will say that. She brought that up in our conversation. She's just like, he's always been like, oh yeah, I forgot.
Yeah.
But I feel like I am too, but maybe it's because I'm the more emotional one of the two. Like, I'm very emotional and my brother is not very emotional.
Okay.
So that's why I assume that's why.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And with being emotional, you become curious, of how to either get yourself out of certain emotions or feel whatever it may be. And also the line of work that you're in too.
That's true.
So what all do you do in the world? Because what is your occupation again?
I'm a therapist. So I work with this population. No, I'm a director. So I oversee therapists right now. But my population is substance abuse, which is high adoptees, domestic violence and trauma and sexual abuse, which is also often involves that. And then just general counseling. Those are my 3 main ones that I work with right now.
Okay. And did you being adopted have any kind of sway as to you becoming a therapist?
I definitely think so. I know for me, a big thing was like, I had such a power, like, I feel like I had such a positive experience with it. And I was like, I want to help those that haven't had a positive experience. I've always felt that way. And maybe that's why my parents think like my relationship with my adoption is different than my brother's, because I've always been trying to like advocate. Like, I remember doing projects as in high school about adoption, because I just had friends that had no idea what adoption even was, had never heard of it before, had never experienced it or knew anyone that experienced it. And for me, it was important for people to know about it, because I think we hear about it in a negative light a lot of times.
Yes.
Read about it and you read like these horror stories of adoption. And, Dr. Charmaine Borda, she was on this, podcast in the first season, and she talked about her failed adoption. Right. And I was like the opposite. Like, I'm like, she's been a huge, she's my mentor. She's been a huge mentor for me since starting, my journey to be a therapist, a marriage and family therapist. And she's like, oh, worked in the field because she went through a failed adoption. And I worked through the field because I went through a successful one. And I've wanted to help people that have been through failed ones and people that have been through successful ones, and trying to figure out even though you've been through a successful adoption, there's still things that come with it emotionally and behaviorally and mental health wise that don't impact a non-adopted person. And that I think non-adoptees have a blinders to.
Hey, I want to share with you something that has changed my life. It's more like someone, my therapist. Why is she so important? Well, because I want to win in this life. I want to break through the carousel of stories I've compiled that hold me back, that keep me from expanding into my full potentiality. Stories of unworthiness, not enoughness, and even stories of questioning why I am here. I also want to stop dumping my unsorted feelings on the people around me and reacting with the same behavioral patterns that keep me stuck. Conversations with my therapist have made me more confident, clearer in my intention, and more centered in my spirit. That is why I am elated that we are sponsored by BetterHelp, where you can, from wherever you happen to be right now, match with a therapist tailored to your exact needs. With BetterHelp, you can tap into a network of over 30,000 licensed and experienced therapists who can help you with a wide range of issues. Someone who you can text at any time and schedule online for either a chat, Zoom, or phone call. And if it turns out that your therapist isn't the right fit, you can switch to a new therapist at no additional cost. Visit the link in the show notes, betterhelp.com, when they were young, to get 10% off the first month. You need to click the link in the show notes in order to get the 10% discount. I want to see you win, beloved. Let's do it together. Visit the link, betterhelp.com, when they were young. I agree with that completely because I believe that I had a successful adoption as well. And simply because, and we all define that differently, but I define as a successful adoption simply because I can talk to my mom about anything and everything and have her not plummet into despair about it. And have her truly love me unconditionally because I have done a lot of things, not gotten myself in trouble in any way. I was actually a pretty square kid.
Me too.
I was the one in high school being the designated driver and staying at home and writing novels. I was so boring.
Yes, I understand that, Lenise, very well, just differently, but very well too.
So I didn't really put her through any kind of drama. But I think because I am emotional as well, and I like to talk about things. And in my family, people don't like to talk about things. Like my mom didn't grow up talking about her feelings and airing things out. And so I think I'm the only one in her life that I'm like, okay, we're going to really examine this situation. And she's like, oh. But it's great because our relationship is just so wonderful. And I don't feel adopted, whatever that is. And my mom's white, right? And it was never a mystery that I was adopted either. And it was never a mystery that my sister wasn't biological. Like my mom acknowledged where we came from, tried to celebrate it, tried to make us feel grounded in who we were, even though, everything shifted. And there was a lot of inherent trauma in that shift, right? You take a two little girls out of their country and you abruptly have them stop speaking their language and stop eating their food, stop seeing the people that they love and have established relationships with, because we were 4 and 5 at the time. And then you say, these are your family, right? This is who you will love. This is who you will respect. And this is what you will learn. And because of that blunt change, it was extremely traumatic. and my body remembers that. But I think it's really interesting. And I loved my conversation with Charmaine, Dr. Charmaine Borda in season 1. And she had so much wisdom around her failed adoption.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
because she investigated that, and it's about this investigation, right? And finding out all the nooks and crannies about adoption. And that's why I want to give people platforms to explore that and to explore these conversations. And so coming into your conversation with your mom, how did you feel about that?
I think we were both like, she was excited, honestly, and I was a little nervous. I think I was nervous that I was going to make her like maybe she would feel upset by things. We're both emotional, so I was like, maybe we're going to get emotional during this process, which we did, of course. That's us. Like, we have 2 emotions, either laughter or tears, and like there's not really an in between. And you'll see that when we talk, it's either laughter or tears. That's pretty much everybody in my family is like laughter or tears, which we love. It's probably not the most effective. I wouldn't recommend that for my clients, but no, I was nervous. I was a little nervous, honestly, because I was like, what if I make her uncomfortable? And she like, even then I called her afterwards and just had like like an extended conversation with her. And I talked to her the next day, like just texted her in the day, like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, why wouldn't I be? And I was like, okay, I guess I was trying to own your anxiety, even though there was no anxiety to have, yeah, it was definitely interesting. A big thing kind of came up that we had never talked about before, which was that my parents had a pretty serious adoption, fall through. And so that had never come up before, like, that there had been this other person, that up until the last day, they thought they were getting this child, and like how that would have changed the trajectory of their family and even more so like my brother and I's lives. And so, yeah, it was interesting. It was definitely interesting. I think didn't expect that to come up either, but maybe somewhere inside I anticipated it. And that's why I was a little nervous. I don't know.
Wow, that's such a huge revelation.
Yeah.
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 Absolutely. I love that you all were courageous enough to be vulnerable and talk about it, Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I have to give it to my mom because I think I had known that they had gone through failed adoptions before. Like, that wasn't a secret. I did not realize the extent to how far the adoption had gone. Like, everything, they were attached. They had a name for the child. They were bringing the child home. And then on the day that they were bringing this child home, it was like, sorry, we changed our minds. Yeah. And then had to return home to like a family waiting for a child and a room set up and like with no child. After at that point, it was 9 years of waiting for, going through this process. So yeah, that was something new for me and a new conversation. And even, my mom, it was, I think, hard for me because I just love them so much to know like them to go through that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And we rarely talk about that, right?
Right.
From the perspective of the adoptive parent when a failed adoption happens.
Right.
And how devastating that moment must be for someone, well, in life, when you want something so bad and you've prepared for it, as you said, and had a family waiting to celebrate, the homecoming, and then to not have that come to fruition is absolutely devastating. And then going through the process again with you and your brother.
Right.
Yeah, that shows so much resilience.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, I was more like a surprise. So I guess they didn't really have time to plan because it was just like a phone call and like, hey, we have a child, come pick her up. Like, it's kind of funny, but yeah, I think it's interesting because I feel like so many of like people that talk about adoption, it's this like spiritual experience where like God calls to you and you like know the signs. And those are the stories that I hear a lot from people. And
Yeah.
like for my family, it was like the reverse. Like it was just like they didn't see the signs. It just kind of things happened in a way that like the universe or however you believe spiritually like happened, So it was interesting for me because that was always my belief, and that, just I was meant to be with who I was with. And so for my mom talked a lot about, they had never shared about the failed adoption before because they didn't want, my brother and I to feel like we weren't the first choice.
Mm.
And I was like, well, I never thought about choices because I just figured like predestiny.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I'm predestined. You were always stuck with me.
Yeah.
No matter like how I was going to be or how this was going to come, like our souls were going to meet each other in this world in this way. And so it was interesting to hear her say like worry about choices because I had never interpreted it that way.
That is very interesting because this idea of choice comes up a lot in like orphan situations, right?
Right.
And you were chosen, you were picked,
Right.
that sort of mentality. And that she was worried about that. I wonder if because of the narratives that are surrounding adoption, someone said, "Oh, we want her to feel like she was the only choice," like the feeling of belonging,
Right.
and
Right.
and the intention behind it all is that she wanted you to feel like you belonged, and there was no other alternative but this moment and this connection between you.
Right.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because when I was in the orphanage in Haiti, my mom was actually she's actually quite open about all the little options she had. And it's funny because I didn't even think about that either. I was like you, I
Right.
was like, it all that matters is what we ended up with, and it was me,
Right. Right.
you know.
Right.
But my mom was very, very just open about the fact that I have a biological brother that was in the orphanage with me,
Mhm.
and she was going to choose me and then my brother, but then she stopped because she was like, I don't know about raising a Black man in America,
Right.
which was
Right.
so smart of her.
Right.
And so, um, because she's a single parent too.
Right.
So, she opted for another little girl, and there was this other girl, I think her name was Jessica or something. Um, Now it's all coming full circle because now my sister's name, well, was it? I don't know. I don't know. But there was another little girl. I think that fell through. And then she got my sister. And I don't know if my sister feels a certain way about it, about that
Yeah.
story. But it is fascinating, these
Yeah.
choices and being picked. Yeah.
It was interesting because after we talked and my mom talked more about the failed adoption, when I talked to her afterwards, she told me the name of the first child's name. And she was like, it's so funny because my brother's name is Robert, and that's a family name. My dad had a brother who passed in childhood, tragically. That was named Robert. My uncle's name is Robert. My grandfather's middle name was Robert. So it was a family name on both sides. And she was like, maybe we knew all along that that wasn't going to be our child and that wasn't going to work because we never planned to name him Robert. And when your brother came along, she was like, we had discussions for years, waiting to have a child that our son's name would be Robert. And when the time came for this child, it wasn't his name to us. She was like, when your brother came along, we knew he was going to be Robert. And I was like, maybe that was a sign,
Yeah.
for you that this is what was predestined. So it's just interesting. It's interesting the idea of choice with adoption because there can be choice, but for some, like my parents, I would say really didn't have a choice. They were desperate for a child. They wanted to take any child, and they were told no at every door. Not every door because they had us, but many doors. They couldn't adopt outside of their race. they couldn't adopt internationally at the time. The adoption agency that I came from, it part of the reason that it took an extensive period of time, which was 11 years, was the fact that it was a Jewish adoption agency. So it was primarily a Jewish adoption agency, and they were only allowing individuals that were, at least one person was Jewish, to adopt the Jewish children from there because they wanted that heritage to live on, which is a great idea.
Yeah.
But hard for those that are like, I just want to take any child, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, I was one of the first Christian kids to come along, and my parents were the first name on the Christian list. And so it was like, for them, they could have made it. It's lucky for me. I'm grateful for it. And I find it to be more of a predestiny type of situation, from a spiritual lens than a choice. I never felt like, oh, if my parents had 4 kids in a row, would they not have picked me? No. So I don't know if that's a testament to how they raised us. I'm sure my brother would feel the same way. Not that I want to speak for him. But I couldn't see him being like, yeah, they would give me back or take someone else. Maybe when he's being difficult, which he's a little bit more hard to handle sometimes than me, he would disagree. But
yeah, my sister would disagree, but definitely was the child.
Yes, my brother was more outspoken one, I would say, than me, in different ways. But interesting.
Now that the conversation is over, over for now, I'm sure you'll continue to discover layers afterwards. But for the podcast purposes, how do you feel now? Like, where do you stand in your relationship with your mom?
Yeah, I mean, we have a great relationship still. I think my mom has had more things come up that, like, maybe she wants to make sure are okay. Like, she hadn't had a conversation with my brother yet about this failed adoption. And so she called me. She's like, I have to have that conversation with him. I know he's not going to be upset, but I need to have, he deserves the right to hear that from me. And not on a podcast, right? Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. And I think it'll be more interesting to see my extended family because, I'm the youngest, one of the youngest. So all of my extended family knew about this failed adoption and nobody's ever said anything to us about it. So I'm curious to see how those conversations change, more so than with my parents. After the podcast, we did have another conversation too about like some things that had come up with my adoption agency. So the adoption agency I'm from was very widely publicized in the news. There was actually a couple of documentaries that came out of it because they were doing like twin studies out of it. In the 60s, apparently. This came out in like 2018, 2017. They were doing twin studies and triplet studies. So essentially they were taking twins, separating them out, and then doing studies on them. And people did not know. To this day, there are people that don't know that they have a twin. And so my parents found this out in 2018. And they just told me after this conversation, they were like, we almost died when we found out. We did a lot of research to see if you could be a twin. It had stopped by the time that you were born. So you most likely do not have a twin, but like we don't think so, but we can find out more if you're worried about it. I'm not so worried about it, honestly, because we're talking a 30 plus year difference. But yeah, it's very interesting. It's interesting, I think, for me, because there was a lot of odd things going on with the agency at the time. My parents even mentioned like, oh, you were the first child to be adopted straight from the hospital in 25 years with that agency. And so it's just interesting. I think it was a conversation, continued conversations to have about that. Just offhandedly, like, what does that all mean? And like, was there fraudulent things? I think that can be concerning as someone that works in the field. But I'm not so concerned because I feel like it worked out in my favor. Unless I have a twin running around, I guess.
I know.
I don't think so, but.
Well, have you seen the documentary One Child Nation?
Yes.
And they talk about how twins and families got split up in the pursuit of the one child mandate in China. Right. And that is the very controversial aspect of interracial, international adoptions, right? Because you
Absolutely.
don't know what's happening in that country.
Absolutely.
And the fact that so many orphanages pop up in a country is alarming, and people should
Mhm.
read it as such. And the orphanage that I came from, that was when I left it, Haiti Home for Children, and then they changed their name to Rainbow of Love. They actually stopped adoptions because there were so many orphanages that started to pop up in Port-au-Prince and elsewhere. And it became more like child trafficking.
Mhm.
And so there's a dark underbelly to adoption, um, that people don't like to talk about. And
Right.
that is one of them, right? These
Right.
men
Absolutely.
getting split up, and these families, some children are abducted into orphanages,
Right.
and some countries are funded through orphanages.
Right.
So it's doing that research that's imperative, and understanding that it's not necessarily that there's so many kids that need homes. There's a government and a system that is corrupt, that is creating environments where so many kids are being adopted.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, ooh, you don't want to get me started on the whole feeling I have with immigration and
Yeah.
domestic human trafficking that we have right now. But
Mhm.
yeah, I think unfortunately I'm hopeful for a change. I think in the last 4 years with some of our immigration policies, what I've seen as a therapist is just increase the incidences of human trafficking of children, and child trafficking. Um, and then we have people here who want to adopt, but are not perhaps as qualified, but believe they are because they have, they're going to save this child.
Mm.
And I always caution against the concept of saving a child. Um, I was never raised with the concept of that my parents they saved us. I was raised with the concept that we saved them.
Mm.
They wanted us. They wanted to have children, and we saved, not saved, but like we gave them that life. Um, yeah, I think when you get into that saved mindset, how can you live up to those expectations, as an adoptee? Like, I don't know how I would be able to. I've never had expectations, I guess, from my parents. They just expected me to live a good life and be happy and, like don't kill people and don't lie and don't cheat. So it's pretty easy to live up to, right? But to think of that concept and the destruction that's associated with that is a scary one. As a therapist and as an adoptee, because it's so prominent still. It's so prominent. Like, oh, just go here and adopt a child. You're saving their life and like you're giving them a better life. But you really don't know what's associated with that and if that's true or not true.
That's exactly right. And the savior complex of adoption just needs to be omitted, obliterated, because you don't
Absolutely.
know if it's a better life. And even after, like, my education and my experiences, I do not claim that this life would have been better than
Right.
had I stayed in Haiti, because I had my family. I have three biological siblings that I will forever be estranged with, throughout this lifetime, because I no longer know Creole, right?
Right.
And not only that, but there's a cultural barrier that is so foreign to me, as I've completely assimilated to American culture. And so you are forfeiting something always. But I love that you were brought up in a household where there wasn't a savior complex. You didn't have the burden and the expectation of that. That is exactly right. And it's liberating for an adoptee, right? We can live
Absolutely.
our own life. We're not beholden. We're not tethered to. We're not feeling a sense of indebtedness that we can never pay back.
Right. I feel like, and my mom brings it up a little bit in our conversation, like even what we see in larger culture continues that. Like this, her big thing is This Is Us, which she loves the show, but they had like an episode where they talked about like, oh, I guess something happened and Randall, who is, adopted in there, like the nurse says, oh, your daughter's eyes look like you. And he's like, oh, that's so important. You have to have someone that you look like. And my mom was like, that's hurtful, or that can be hurtful. And a big character plot. And that is that, like, that concept of the savior complex for this adoption. And while I appreciate that they want to bring adoption to light, it's kind of like, who's writing these stories? Because if you and I wrote this story, we could write a story. And I mean, you've done that so beautifully already, but you can write a story about adoption that doesn't involve one person or one part of it being the savior and one person being, the adoptee having a struggle with that. You can write a story that talks about adoption where it's normalized and it's, doesn't include that. But I don't think we know how to do that yet because adoptees are not the ones speaking about it.
That's so important. And that's one of the reasons why I've started to write about it, because I wonder if the writers in the room for This Is Us are adopted at all. Exactly. Because you get the sense of romanticized kind of view of it. The Oliver twist starts to come in, and it's so much more complex than that. There's so many layers to that. And even the Broadway show, a small hard pill or something like that, about, and I don't like this word, transracial adoption, was consulted by an adoptee, but it wasn't written by an adoptee. And there's a big difference. And so I definitely am trying to shift that as those who in other, subcultures, categories around the world are trying to reclaim their own narrative, because people outside of it will never understand the complexity of being adopted and the layers that are added if it's an interracial, international, intercultural adoption. It just expands the trauma. And so it's so important for us to be able to tell these stories, to tell them at our pace with our language, and be given platforms to do so.
Absolutely. And I think a big thing, and at least for me, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, is like people questioning it when you try to tell your story. For me, a lot of people will question when they ask me about my cultural history and I say I'm German, right? My family is German. My dad's side is very strong German. And they're like, well, yeah, but I mean, you're not really. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Like, I didn't realize you were ancestry.com and like here to do my 23andMe DNA test, but people will question when you tell your story, I think more often because they want you to fit that dominant discourse. For me as someone who's an adoptee who is adopted from the hospital, when people hear like, oh, you weren't at an orphanage, it's like, oh, whatever. Like, you don't matter, and so it's kind of
less
like,
of the trauma.
Right. And I'm like, I'm not saying that I've been through the experiences of my friends that are adoptees that have been through orphanages, because that comes with different layers of trauma, right? But there still can be a piece of trauma of not having that initial attachment, right? Of being in a hospital for 2 weeks with your only attachment being food, right? The only time a baby's in the hospital, they get attention when they get food and when they get changed, and that's it. And so there are pieces biologically that stay with you, no matter how wonderful my parents are. And I think I have the most wonderful parents. If I could give them the award, I would, and so it's not to diminish what they've done. What they've done is raise a person who has had those biological effects of that initial trauma that you can't change, and raised her into someone that's successful, kind, caring person. That's a testament to them. That's not a testament to me. But that's still there. And so to diminish someone's experience because it's not what you want it to be, right? Is difficult. And I think it will be difficult for adoptees to continue to tell their stories, because that's what happens sometimes, is that our peers want to hear the interesting ones. like the Oliver Twist that become and Annie, where, they save this little girl from the rough, abusive orphanage, and she's with Daddy Warbucks and she's rich now, and if your story doesn't sound like that, it's irrelevant because it's not cool enough, So I hope we can get there. I hope so.
I think so. It will take time.
Absolutely.
It definitely will. And there is a shift happening in the paradigm, more podcasts, more books coming out that are created by adoptees for adoptees and getting our stories out there. From our perspective is happening more and more. And that's what needs to happen. And that's so much more than 10 years ago, right?
Absolutely.
So there is hope on the horizon. And I love just running into adoptees such as yourself who have become physicians and healers and creating an opportunity to assist other adoptees on the medicinal level. I think it's so important. And who better to do it, So that is, I love that. I love that.
Thank you for that.
It's very admirable. And I usually ask at the end of these episodes, where in your life can you apply courage? But I feel like you did that, Jamie-Lyn.
Thank you.
Like you did that. And both you and your mom. And it takes so much courage to have these conversations and to reveal new information and to come on a podcast and do it.
Yeah, my mom's like, it takes 30 years in a podcast, apparently, for me to tell you this. Like, it was never a secret. I just kind of forgot we didn't talk about it.
Yes. It's so great. And it's so inspirational. And these episodes, and I said this to both you and your mom, these episodes are the most popular because they're not happening anywhere else. And also people need an example. They need expanders. They need people to show them the possibilities for their lives. And I so appreciate both you and your mom doing that on this podcast and showing people the potentiality of great conversations that lead to understanding, depth of healing, and a deeper relationship. Now you know something that your mom is free of now. She can unburden herself with it, and your relationship has grown because of it. So thank you for that, for the vulnerability, for the courage, and for just the gift of this podcast, because it will change lives.
Thank you. Thank you for letting us have an opportunity on such a big scale to talk about it, because we love to talk about adoption and have tried our entire life, my entire life, to be a positive influence for people or positive place for people to talk about it and ask questions about it and share. But it's awesome to be able to hopefully help other people that could want to have those conversations and maybe are scared. Just do it. It'll be okay. You might cry. That's okay. That is okay, because you will laugh also. And that will happen. But thank you, Lenise. I so appreciate you and you doing this for all of us adoptees. It's so important that there's someone brave enough to open the door for the rest of us. And you've kicked it down. You didn't just open it. You really did. You said, hey, there's a door. I'm going to kick it. Everybody jump on board. And you helped us, jump through it. So I so appreciate you starting the change for us, because it's important. And as a person who's getting older and wants to have kids and has nieces and nephews, I want them to live in a world of change, especially when it comes to perceptions on adoption.
Here are my reflections. 1, bring adoption up when they are in diapers, so that the word doesn't surprise the child later on. Doing this also normalizes and dissipates the shame and secrecy around the word adoption. 2. The concept of being chosen should be challenged. It harkens back to the old tales of people choosing from many options of children all lined up in one room, kind of an Orphan Annie situation. I love the idea of predestined, where the parent becomes a guardian, a guide, and gives the child freedom to become anything they need to be, just like a biological child. Also, I steer away from being chosen or feeling chosen because it makes me get pangs of survivor's guilt. Because many of the children who remained behind and grew up in the orphanage still remember me, including my 3 siblings. I would hate for them to feel that they hadn't been chosen. 3, we all define successful adoptions differently. But one thing I'm finding is the common thread is an open channel of communication. As I said before, I don't get triggered by talking about my adoption because I've integrated the work. However, I did that all on my own. I was not brought up to diffuse the power of trigger words such as orphan, adoption, adoptee, and many others. It's a beautiful thing when the whole family works to dissipate the hurt and normalize their collective story. 4, whether an adoptee was put in an orphanage or came straight from a social worker or hospital, there is trauma. We should not compare initial traumas. Okay, thank you, Jamie-Lyn and Denise, for sharing your beautiful story with us. I have learned so much from the both of you. And you, out there, continue to let me know how you feel about these episodes on Instagram at Young Adoptee. You can always find adoption resources at laniceantoineshelley.com. Just so you know, I read each and every review written on iTunes. Oh, thank you so very much for them. Okay, now, I don't know about you, but I've earned some beach time today. I am headed out. Another beautiful episode. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to my guest today. If you liked this episode, the best way to support me and this work is to write an iTunes review, a 5-star review. This helps us reach the top of searches and helps more people to find us. And if you personally want to connect, please reach out on Instagram or Facebook. And I have some great resource material on my website at laniceantoineshelley.com. So go on over there too. Until next we meet, go gently and have courage, my love.